Vladimir Putin signed a decree to accept two new regions into Russia, the Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol. This is an official holiday in Crimea, the day of reunification with Russia, the day of the return of Sevastopol to Russia. Let me remind you that this historic step became a result of the free expression of the will on the referendum on March 16, 2014, during which the people of Crimea and Sevastopol took the decision and expressed their lawful will and made the only right and confident choice to move further with Russia. And the results are apparent to everyone. 96.7% of the voters in Crimea and 99.5% of people in Sevastopol voted to reunify with their historical motherland. These are not just figures. This is the voice of the people. This is the foundation of democracy and the democratic process. It was heard and supported by Russia, the Russian people. And now we truly stand united. This event, poetically called the Russian Spring, became a symbol of historical justice that we have fought and suffered for. And unfortunately, there is still suffering going on today due to the open hybrid war against our country. But Crimea returned home. This was a key moment of the consolidation of the Russian society. And to quote political scientists, the point of assembly for all the people, the entire nation. We showed the world the unbending will of the people to defend their roots, their history, their identity. That which we call the true traditional values. The past 12 years have become an era of the revival of the peninsula. Today's Crimea is more than just a region of the world or a unique place. This is a region of dynamic development in Russia. I sincerely congratulate all the people of Crimea and Sevastopol, all the citizens of the Russian Federation on this important occasion. We've been moving forward together and we are proud of our common motherland. Yes, we are going through challenges. As has always been, this is our history too. We have another important day, which is coming soon. This is a new date for us, but still based on historical memory. As you know, January 1st, 2026, two laws entered in force. Federal Law 74 FZ, dated April 21st, 2025, on immortalizing the memory of the victims of the genocide of the Soviet people during the Great Patriotic War of 1941-1945. And Federal Law number 523 FZ, dated December 29, 2025, on amendments to Article 1.1 of the Federal Law on Days of Military Glory and commemorative dates in Russia. According to them, April 19th is declared the day of remembrance of the victims of the genocide of the Soviet people committed by the Nazis and their accomplices during the Great Patriotic War of 1941-1945. The choice of April 19 as this day of remembrance is tied to the fact that on this day in 1943, Decree number 39 of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR was issued. It was on measures of punishment for German fascist villains guilty of murders and tortures of the Soviet civilian population and captured Red Army soldiers, for spies, traitors to the motherland from among Soviet citizens, and for their accomplices. This was a legal assessment. It was the first time the fact of a targeted and large-scale policy by the Nazis and their accomplices to destroy the peaceful population in the occupied territory was recognized, along with the punishability of such crimes. The decree became the legal basis for further work to bring the Nazis and their accomplices to justice. It laid the legal foundations for the famous Nuremberg Tribunal, whose anniversary was celebrated a few months ago. And, of course, the subsequent trials against the Nazis and their accomplices were also based on this decree. On January 27th this year, on the day of the complete lifting of the siege of Leningrad, the Russian Prime Minister, Mr. Mikhail Mishustin, signed an order. According to it, the National Center for Historical Memory under the President of the Russian Federation was designated as the national operator to immortalize the memory of the victims of the genocide of the Soviet people during the Great Patriotic War. In 1948, the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment for the Crime of Genocide entered into force. The extermination of Jews, Roma, and Serbs during the Second World War was internationally recognized as genocide. However, the crimes of the Third Reich against the Soviet people were not limited to intentions to destroy national, ethnic, racial, or religious groups, as defined by the Convention. In their inhuman fanaticism, they went much further. The principles of state policy of the Reich, formulated in writing and systematically implemented by the Nazis on USSR territory, led to the deaths of millions of peaceful Soviet citizens. This terrifying figure far exceeded the consequences of what is called the Holocaust in Israel and the genocide of Serbs and Roma. The Nazis systematically destroyed the entire population of our country, regardless of ethnic, racial, or religious affiliation. Russians, Jews, Belarusians, Tatars, Ukrainians, Chuvars were citizens of the USSR. They lived on lands that, according to Hitler's criminal plan, was subject to ruthless Germanization. That was a direct quote, a hideous quote. Our duty to the memory of our ancestors is to prevent the forgetting of crimes without a statute of limitations. But not only that, modern governments of countries that directly participated in the greatest tragedy of mankind, the Second World War, do not hesitate to draw an equal sign between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Imagine that. They place the Nazi swastika and the Red Star on the same level, the Red Star and the red banner that defeated Nazism. And now they are putting an equal sign to the symbols of the Third Reich. Therefore, it is especially important in modern realities, filled with such false interpretations, to correctly name what happened then and prevent the distortion or falsification of meanings and senses. Modern historians have calculated how many peaceful Soviet citizens became victims of the ruthless Nazi extermination policy. By the most conservative estimates and the verified historical estimates, the figure is striking: 13.7 million people. This figure is made up of archival data, witness testimonies, and accounting of thousands of mass graves in the liberated occupied territory. It is proven that at least 7.4 million peaceful Soviet residents were deliberately killed, shot, burned, and just think about it, buried alive. Penal labor in concentration camps and inhuman treatment led to the painful deaths of another 2 million people and more. Among those driven to forced labor in Germany, more than 1 million children and teenagers were placed in concentration camps. According to the idea of the Third Reich's top brass, most children from the USSR were meant to be destroyed. They became forced blood donors, biological raw material, minor slaves, and human shields during military operations. Among the residents of the occupied territories, over 4 million more people died prematurely. They died from the overall deterioration of living conditions, diseases, and hunger. But this figure, 13.7 million people, does not include all the victims of Hitler's regime's crimes. As a result of the largest war crime in history, the siege of Leningrad, at least 1 million people died. Every year, we learn more and more names of the victims. We compiled a new figure, the number of victims of that atrocious act committed by the Nazis against a peaceful city. Hundreds of thousands of peaceful citizens were killed by bombings in Sevastopol and Odessa, Kerch and Novorossiysk, Smolensk and Tula, Murmansk, Kharkov, Minsk on August 23, 1942, even before the German troops broke through, before the legendary battle began, during a massive raid by German aviation in Stalingrad. In just one day, from 40 to 70,000 civilians died. One of the most beautiful, peaceful cities of the Soviet Union was turned into ruins. Can Soviet prisoners of war who died in Hitler's camps also be considered victims of the genocide staged by the Nazis? The Hitlerites deliberately, through exhaustion and torture, exterminated about 3 million and more than 3 million, 3.1 million Soviet prisoners of war to be exact, about 60% of their total number. Meanwhile, the mortality rate of Allied soldiers, US, Britain, France, who ended up in German captivity was recorded at a completely different level, 3 to 4%. Demographers determined the total population loss of the USSR during the Great Patriotic War, according to various estimates, at 30 to 40 million people. This is the number from which we should start calculating the real losses. The scale of the tragedy is unthinkable. This is the number that we should use for the real calculations to learn of the real scale of the genocide of the Soviet people. The echo of war sounded over our country for a long time. Indirect losses, unformed families, unborn children, premature deaths from diseases and wounds. Who will count them? And now the soldiers of the Red Army who liberated Europe and the whole world from fascism back in the middle of the 20th century are now excluded from the ranks of the victors. They do not talk about those who made a decisive contribution to the defeat of the Brown Plague. They rename streets, tear down monuments, dig up graves. And some go even further. They blame the USSR for starting the war. Apparently, our guilt is that the Soviet Union, contrary perhaps to someone's expectations and plans, survived, even though it suffered losses unprecedented in history. We survived and became not another victim, but a victor nation. But this does not cancel the fact of the genocide of the Soviet people in any way. This day is coming soon, April 19th, remember that, and let us do our best. Each and every one of us, and trust me, much depends on us, to make sure this is not yet another day. We should make this day noticed and noticeable in schools, in universities, in your offices, and this should be covered by the mass media. Share the stories. Fill this day with stories, facts, figures. Trust me, this is an important day for our historical calendar. Sure, we have the 22nd of June, a day of memory and sorrow. We bow down our heads on this day. We have the 9th of May, when we honor the heroes and congratulate each other on the fact that our country still stands. But this day, April 19th, is the day when we must remember what they wanted to do with us. And unfortunately, what they did against millions of citizens of the Soviet Union. They were deliberately killing our citizens under the sole guise and the sole pretext and explanation. The sole reason was that, according to the ruling elites of Central Europe, these people were not meant to exist. Now moving on to the traditional scheduling, the minister's schedule. On March 24th, a meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Gorchakov Fund for Public Diplomacy Support will take place. It will be chaired by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The participants will review the results of activities in 2025 and approve work directions for 2027. The fund was created, let me remind you, in 2010 by an order of the Russian president. Its goal is to support public diplomacy, help the domestic non-governmental sector participate in international cooperation, and involve its institutions in the foreign policy process. Every year, under its auspices, scientific and educational programs are held for young international policy and international relations experts from Russia, the CIS, and other states. It assists in organizing conferences, roundtables, and expert meetings. This includes conveying Russian approaches to key global policy issues to foreign partners. And on April 8th of this year, in the reception house of the Russian Foreign Ministry, under the MFA chairmanship, the 46th meeting of the Council of Heads of Russian Regions will take place, chaired by the minister, governors, senior staff of the Russian presidential administration, and federal executive bodies will take part in it. The main topic on the agenda is strengthening cooperation between Russian regions and partners from Africa. During the meeting, a report will be heard from the head of the Council's working group, Astrakhan Region Governor, Mr. Igor Babushkin. Recommendations will also be adopted to boost regional activities in this direction. In addition, there are plans to hear an informational report by Amur Region Governor Vasily Orlov. He will speak about the federal-level competence center for Russian-Chinese cooperation in Blagoveshchensk as a tool for interaction between Russian and Chinese regions. Now moving on to the current international agenda. We are deeply concerned by the non-stop military struggle between our friendly nations, Pakistan and Afghanistan, bringing tragic consequences, including for the civilian population. A new tragic episode was an airstrike, as a result of which in Kabul on the evening of March 16th, according to media reports, a rehabilitation center for drug addicts was destroyed. There are numerous victims, according to reports. 400 people died, 240 civilians were injured. Expressing deep condolences to the relatives of the deceased, we again urgently called on Islamabad and Kabul to abandon the dead-end course for confrontation and resolve differences through political and diplomatic means. Moving on to the situation in the Middle East.
As you know, regularly, practically daily, we comment on the issue with relevant messages and with the statements of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and in detail this situation on a regular basis is being assessed and commented publicly by the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, His Excellency Mr. Sergei Lavrov, which is why, in line with this, I would like to focus specifically on the important aspects. And of course, undoubtedly, with the geographical and political aspect, but that also have to do with the trade markets, on the energy aspects, and of course on ecology. That is supposedly being discussed so much, but right now we would like to look at it through the prism of actual figures and the processes that will be developed in the near future, because the aggravation of the situation, if we can still refer to it, a real tragedy in the Middle East, near the Persian Gulf, has additional negative spaces. First, it's the largest oil-carrying region. The Middle Eastern states are one of the key producers and suppliers of energy resources. According to the International Energy Agency, Persian Gulf states supply around a third of world volume of oil and around 40% of gas. And for the Hormuz Gulf, there is about a fifth part of all oil and about 30% of the LNG. This concentration of resources and routes makes the world market affectable in light of the destabilization of the situation in the region, which directly threatens the global energy security. Just look at how often it was discussed and continues to be discussed. The Middle East conflict put the energy markets in the situation of turbulence and imposed great damages to the world economy. Analytical researchers of leading investment companies all agree that daily consumers do not receive additional 15 million of barrels of oil and 4.5 million barrels of oil products. Around 20% of the supplies of LNG have already been withdrawn from the markets, and according to the estimates, the global export of LNG has lowered by 219,000 tons per day, which is about the fifth of daily world consumption of methanol. Could be facing the deficit about 18 million tons per year, according to the experts. With 30-day lowering of supplies, the price of oil could be stabilized about $76 per barrel. And these are the most common estimates. And if we are facing a 2-month lowering of supplies, $93 per barrel. After the prolongation of conflict, the prices could surge up to $150 or $200 per barrel. Raising the prices by $10, and this is why it's important, will directly affect everyone, will lower the world GDP by 0.1%, and raising the oil prices to $125 will lead to the recession of European economics. Strictly speaking, the scope of consequences for the global economy will depend on the longevity and the intensity of the conflict. The world energy markets responded to the Middle Eastern conflict, and in the first 2 weeks the oil prices has changed rapidly, and the peak on March 9th reached $120 per barrel. Right now it's continuing to stay above $100 per barrel. As for March 17th, $104.08, and the markets have always responded to any Middle East instability. Just remember July 4th, 2008, when the oil reached the historical maximum, $143.95 per barrel. In the first day of the military actions, the price of April futures of oil on the European markets has surged almost by 25%. As for now, the situation continues to be unstable and is going around $600 for 1,000 cubic meters. Now let's look at how this situation has affected the insurance companies. They've raised the damages price as well as introduced new additions. The price of insuring a ship in the Persian Gulf has surged 6 times in comparison with February 27th, and is now going around $200,000 to $500,000 per day. Can you imagine that? In order to counter the further destabilization of energy markets, 32 countries of the International Energy Agency have decided to liberate 400 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves. Other than that, U.S. also intend to liberate from the reserves 172 million barrels of black gold. Although, according to different estimates, this volume of new oil could cover barely 25 days of traffic through that Gulf. We can't forget to mention another issue that's been created by the aggressive actions by the U.S. and Israel aggression against Iran and the destabilization of the region as a whole since the military actions have begun in the Middle East. The products markets have responded by raising prices for fertilizers and their components, and the prices are due to the risk of full blocking of the Hormuz Gulf. As the countries are huge producers and exporters of these products, this transport corridor is responsible for around 30% of all fertilizers, and the situation is aggravated by the seasonal demand and the surge of prices for the natural gas used for the nitrogen fertilizers. And the approximate surge of prices has already gone above 20%, And the prices in Asia for carbamide have already reached $700 per ton, which is the maximum for the last 3.5 years. Perhaps you have missed something, but it seems we all have missed something. Where are the statements of different kinds of human rights organizations? These kinds, such as product security, fertilizers prices surge. This cannot be viewed solely differentiated from human rights. These are precisely the human rights that they seemed so concerned about. But it seems that the West only sees the human rights as the right to change sex, and everything else they are forgetting about. So all the human rights institutes or institutions in the West should be ringing all the bells and ringing all the alarms. They should be on high alert and should be drawing the attention of the international community as a whole, so that every country with huge economic issues that existed before that, the poorest countries where people are dying of starvation, of illnesses, where people are fighting for the simple right to access to clean water or any kind of food. Where is everyone? I believe human rights are in the exact same place where they have been witnessing the murdering of children in Donbass for many years, but we will speak more on that later on. The grain prices are showcasing a more stable dynamic of price growth, around 3-5%, but that's for countries with quite stable economy and agriculture. So these are the figures that are in a limited range of price surge. But what about the poorest countries? Due to the rise of prices for energy carriers, new prices for logistics, in the nearest time we could be facing raised prices for basic products, food. Experts are stating that we could see 50% less of harvest, which could surge a new global food inflation. In the long-term perspective, due to the shortages of agrochemical production, the losses could lead to about 0.5 to 2% of global GDP, which is equal to the losses of half to $2 trillion of US dollars. And I cannot forget to mention that the aggression of the Israeli armed forces in the US against Iran is also affecting the environment. So where is everyone who for 15 or 20 years non-stop have built their campaigns on the ecological agenda? Suddenly they're silent. Military equipments carry heavy chemicals, different kind of chemical, as well as other toxics, the dioxides of serum and the nitrogens, which spoils the soil. And those are not facts taken out of context. It's all affecting the health of population, as well as products and everything else. The remains of destroyed buildings on the territories of Iran due to bombardments will be a serious ecological issue for decades ahead. The layer that has been formed from the products of explosion and the oil burning, from the destroyed military equipment and military reserves, all kinds of trash will lead to the greenhouse exposure, as well as the dirty waters. And it will not just affect Iran, but the whole region. And unfortunately, the strikes on the object of energy infrastructures is a routine. And as many have assumed, is a normal thing during the military conflict, but when it comes to Iran, they're also affecting the oil reserves located very close to the heavily populated capital, which has led to the largest affection of the reservoirs in Tehran, which led to the black rain. Usually, rain washes away all the dirt, but in this case, it just aggravated the situation. All the toxic chemicals that have been mixed with water are even more toxic, and coming into contact with them could affect terribly the health care of all those affected, of children as well. Where's everyone? Where's UNICEF? Where all the human rights activists, child human rights activists, who ran around, speaking of Syrian boys, blaming all those who were not responsible for that? The WHO is fixating the degradation of the healthcare and ecological situation in the region, leading to the growth of respiratory diseases affecting eyes and skin due to a lot of toxic chemicals affecting soil, water, and food. There is lack of access to quality healthcare. According to the WHO, from 28th of February this year, they have launched strikes against 18 healthcare institutions in Iran, which led to the death of 8 healthcare officials in Lebanon, which led to serious interruptions in the work of emergency cars. There is a huge lack of medical equipment. An additional charge is the growing migrational flows. Yes, all of that is terrifying. But add on top of that all the suffering that has been experienced by those who were in Gaza. And who was eradicated. Many tens of thousands of people fell victim to that. According to the estimates of WHO, all these facts showcase a terrible situation, creating aggravating risks for the mostly vulnerable amongst the population. So in the short-term perspective, there will be more price surges due to the lack of energy resources and the oil deficit, which is aggravating the agriculture. As the fertilizers are getting more expensive, this is creating real risks due to the lack of agricultural product in energy-dependent countries of Asia, Africa, and Europe, which could lead to the largest ecology catastrophe in the region of Persian Gulf and beyond. But our country doesn't just fixate it and draws conclusions. During the last week's briefing, due to the destruction of many hospitals and ambulance stations, and due to a lot of victims among the citizens, Iran asked our country for the supply of medical supplies, and we immediately responded to help our friends. And due to the decree of the President of the Russian Federation on March 12th, the airplane Il-76 of the Russian emergency services has delivered to the airport of the Azerbaijani city Linkarani, which is located on the border with Iran, the first supply of humanitarian aid, around 13 tons of medical equipment. And we stand in solidarity with Iran, and we're especially grateful to the Azerbaijani side for aiding in this operation. We've always responded in time to all the messages of Tehran, which happened due to the flooding in February 2023, to the earthquake, and in May 2024 to the search and rescue operation when the helicopter of the president has crashed, and in April 2025 after the fire in the city of Bandar Abbas. And we will continue to help the friendly Iranian people that has faced so much hardship along the way. I understand that right now historic memory is not just being written, but people are also suffering from short-term memory loss. And also when the education system is aimed at showcasing history even less than it used to be before. So it's difficult to understand history, and for those who believe that this is new, that this has never happened before, or I really quote unquote liked the statement more, I was terrified by the statement of very short-sighted people among the Brussels bureaucratic institutions that supposedly Russia is to blame. Now we're to blame according to them. But I would really like to ask them, could you at least restore the chain of events of at least 15 years that you, your countries, your international, regional organization and military blocs participated in, or that also poses a real challenge? Before placing blame on others, perhaps you should recall how you, Brussels officials, how your arms are full of blood. 15 years ago, on March 19th. Soon we will be unfortunately celebrating a horrific tragedy anniversary. On March 19th, 2011, the NATO has launched an intervention in Libya, bypassing the fundamental principles of international law. And the NATO operation, does Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, and Beryl, how it used to be called, the Unified Protector, which led to the collapse of Libyan statehood and plunged the country to the state of chaos and anarchy for many years. And Libya still cannot recover from the actions of NATO forces to this day.
Who was this protector defending against? Who was NATO protecting the Libyans against? They were talking about it a lot, but as usual, they were talking about democracy, freedom, plurality, and so on. In reality, the NATO operation turned into indiscriminate strikes on the civilian population, the destruction of civilian infrastructure facilities, weapon supplies in violation of the embargo, the participation of Western instructors and special forces in supporting one of the warring sides in an internal conflict. This is what the NATO allies were actually doing in Libya. They simply destroyed the country and then left it to its fate. Unfortunately, there is nothing surprising here. It is worth noting that NATO member states act this way everywhere they appear. One can recall together, for example, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Did anyone bear any responsibility for this? You know the answer is no. Now they keep running around, seeking some accusation against Russia or coming up with yet another tribunal or yet another warrant. At least 1 million peaceful Iraqis were killed. 1 million is only the calculation of the civilians done by the NGOs. Perhaps someone could file a claim or issue an arrest warrant against those who committed the aggression in Iraq. Perhaps they will pay some compensation to the Iraqis or the Libyans. No. Just in the period from the start of the Unified Protector operation, the NATO aggression against Libya, to the end of May 2011 as a result of alliance airstrikes on Libyan territory, 718 people died and 4,067 people were injured. These are civilians. There are also documented facts of NATO crimes against the civilian population. Some of them were even reflected in reports by several authoritative international structures and NGOs, including the final report of the International Commission of Inquiry, presented at the 19th session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva in March 2012. So what? These are mere words for them, and motivation for new crimes. One of the most resonant episodes was a series of rocket and bomb strikes by Alliance air forces on two so-called former agricultural buildings in the area of the Naljar settlement near the city of Zlitan. As a result, 85 people became victims, including 33 children. NATO press service representative Mr. Lavoie declared that the strike on these targets, not even people, was of an absolutely legitimate nature. The armed NATO operation against sovereign Libya 15 years ago became a tragedy, the long-term and multifaceted consequences of which are felt to this day. Today, the price of the Libyan conflict in monetary terms alone is approximately $1 trillion. As for the losses among the peaceful population of the country plunged into the abyss of multi-year destructive internal civil crisis, no one has even tried to calculate them. And the deaths of the people come after money for the sole reason, because this is an appeal to the Westerners. They only understand the language of money. The people and their lives, the fates of children, mean nothing to them. And now yet another example of what they committed in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, in different parts of the world. They do the same in the central of Europe, the Ukrainian crisis. They are increasing targeted rocket and drone strikes on civilian objects, residential buildings, medical and educational institutions, civil and social enterprises. The topics are all the same. The armed forces of Ukraine keep increasing their strikes. But who are those who target the strikes? Who are those who oversee them? These are the same people who are now committing crimes in the zone of the Persian Gulf. Over the past week, over 240 people were injured, including 6 children. 30 people died. Moving through the regions, Belgorod region from March 12th to 15th, several municipalities of the region survived drone attacks at once. About 20 people were injured on the night of March 15th. Bandera followers again subjected Belgorod and the Belgorod region to a massive rocket attack using Western types of weapons. This time, at least 12 units of American HIMARS MLRS were used. DPR on March 14 in Avdiivka, the Isnovatsky district, as a result of an explosive device detonation while on duty. Employees of the 82nd Fire and Rescue Unit of the city of Yasinovatia were injured. The squad commander died. 3 more rescuers received injuries. The Zaporozhye region on March 13, as a result of a UAV strike in the Melitopol district of the Svetodolinskoye-Fedorovka railway stretch, a locomotive was damaged. 2 employees of the Novorossiya Railways enterprise died. 2 more civilians received injuries due to drone attacks in the city of Dnepropetrovsk and near the village of Podgorny, Krasnodar territory. On March 14th, a Ukrainian airplane-type drone attacked the Kavkaz port in the Temryuk district. 2 civilians were injured.